This week's lesson learned is literally a lesson about learning. Try saying that sentence 5 times fast. Namely, the lesson that when you make a weekly newsletter about your learning journey, maybe don't be surprised when you realize that something you said less than 7 days ago may no longer be quite as factual as you thought. Which, actually, I realized after going back through issue number 3 for the video that I basically mentioned this last week in the form of, take your time because you're learning. Except in that case, I managed to not say something incorrect because I had another topic to cover first. But still, I can't believe I forgot my own lesson in under 7 days. So this week, I'm going over a realization I made that conflicts with something I said last week and how it highlighted another gap in my knowledge. Fortunately, it still fits into my topic about panels, though it will push my other topic about panels to next week. Who knew there could be so much to say about the shape of the lines that border our art? Certainly not the me of 2 weeks ago, that's for sure. Last week, I talked about how most panels in comics are squares and rectangles, with a lot of variety on the pages coming from simply changing the size of said squares and rectangles. This still holds up. In fact, the more comics I've read lately, the more I see this as fact. But it also made me notice something I'd said that, out of context, could be misconstrued as incorrect. And that has to do with my piece about diagonal panels. I talked about how artists tend to use diagonal or oddly shaped panels to add a sense of action or interest to whatever's happening inside the panel. And this, again, is still true, in certain contexts. Because as I was flipping through some comics this week, 2 observations stood out to me. Firstly, a lot of older Western comics tend to stick to only using squares and rectangles as panels. Some stories that definitely have moments of action, tension, or intrigue never deviate from their rectangle format. Or, if they do, it's very brief. For example, I was reading V for Vendetta, which includes quite a few intense moments of action or drama, yet it always retains a very rigid structure in its paneling. They play a lot with the width of panels, but in general the height of each panel allows them to neatly stack 3 to 4 rows on every page regardless of the scene. And there wasn't a diagonal or varying panel shape in sight, it was all squares and rectangles. Then in The Killing Joke, the same thing. All square and rectangular panels. You'd think a comic about people going crazy would get crazy with its paneling, but nope. The most we get are brief moments where something breaks the edge of the panel, usually Joker during a big moment in the story, and a small handful around the fight scene towards the end. Yet despite the lack of dynamic paneling choices, these still read as intense, sometimes action-packed stories, which goes to show that as long as you know how to tell a story, you can indeed get away with just using squares and rectangles for panels. In another newsletter, I'll talk about how composition choices can create dynamic action in square panels, which is something these comics make full use of. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that older Western comics do indeed have a bit of fun with their paneling from time to time, and a minor dive into the evolution of how Western comics have told their stories could be a fun topic for another newsletter. But let's move on to the second observation. And that is, there is one genre of graphic novel that absolutely throws a wrench into my initial thoughts on the use of diagonal panels: shoujo manga. You'll be forgiven if you're listening to this and you have no idea what a shoujo manga is. Basically, it's a genre of Japanese comics that are marketed toward young girls. They tend to have romance as one of, if not the, central focuses of the story, and they tend to have young, usually teenage girls as the main characters. Sailor Moon is probably one of the most popular examples of a shoujo series that even someone who hasn't actively consumed any shoujo series has probably at least heard of or seen products of. Shoujo manga, to put it bluntly, exists on vibes. They tend to focus on the emotional states of their characters and use a ton of creative paneling choices to represent those feelings. Crack open a shoujo manga, and it won't be long before you encounter diagonal panels, characters popping out of panels, or the biggest stylistic hallmark of shoujo, what panel lines? We use flowers and sparkles to edge our art, especially if the character is feeling big emotions like love or affection at that moment. If you really want to learn how to get creative with your paneling, grab some shoujo manga. They are absolutely packed with a variety of panel sizes and shapes that will get you thinking about how the way something is presented affects the mood and reading of the page. Seeing these 2 examples in contrast got me rethinking my stance on when to use certain panel types, and particularly, it got me thinking about how genre affects the types of panels artists use. As I mentioned, shoujo manga is a cornucopia of diverse paneling choices, and this appears to be a trend. I'm sure some shoujo manga out there defy this by sticking to mostly squares and rectangles, But in the brief dive I did into various examples, it didn't take me long to find interesting pages with interesting panel choices for any story I looked up. Now, I'll admit there's a blank area in my research, and it's shaped like romance-focused Western graphic novels. So I can't say with absolute certainty that girl-focused story equals a tendency towards varying panel choices. I mean, Suit Armor is classified as a romantic fantasy, and it makes use of various panel choices. But Avatar: The Last Airbender has roughly an equal amount of panel diversity, and it's not considered a romance story. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that what these two comics have in common is that they both have clear inspirations from Japanese manga. And when you look at Japanese manga as a whole, you find diverse panel choices with far more frequency. Look at the other side of the shoujo coin and you'll find shonen manga aimed at young boys that tend to be very action and combat heavy. The dialogue scenes tend to stick to a rigid structure, but once action gets introduced, the paneling goes wild. As media from other countries starts mingling, you start seeing a rise in people copying from other genres. It's no exaggeration to say that Japanese media has had a massive impact on Western media. Just look at how often the famous Akira motorcycle slide is homaged for evidence of that. No matter what language an artist speaks, visuals will always be understood. And when an artist sees something neat that another artist did, it's not uncommon for them to want to try it in their own work. And in doing so, they begin to blur the lines of what types of things tend to be locked into certain genres of media. Yes, a romance-focused story will probably make greater use of diagonals and unique paneling than, say, a supernatural thriller story, or even an action-focused story. A comedy may stick to mostly square panels because it's less about what the characters are doing and more about what they're saying. And there is something to be said for repeatedly using the same size panel to either give a sense of the mundane or to draw your eye to what changes between those panels. But that's a topic for another newsletter. My point is, if you're looking to tell a story within a specific genre, take some time to look at the types of panels commonly used by that genre. You don't have to copy what they're doing. Their panel choices do not constitute the rules of that genre. But you can start to ask yourself, why is this the format they chose? Is it artistic preference, or does something about the way the panels are shaped affect the mood and the way the story is read? You may be surprised by what you find. I know for me, I'm aiming to write a story that classifies as a comedy and slice-of-life story, but that also leans into fantasy and even the occasional serious moments. It doesn't sit neatly into one genre, and so my panel choices are going to change based on the type of scene I'm writing. But I definitely still have more to learn before I start making those choices. So maybe my initial statements about diagonal panels being used for action shots wasn't quite on the mark. Tons of actiony moments take place in square panels, and tons of diagonal panels are used in moments that don't involve two people trying to hit each other. But they still have a time and place. Artists wouldn't be using them if they didn't. Next week, I want to spend some time going over types of panels and when they get used in more depth. But first, I have some more reading to do. I've been tearing through my stack of reference material, and I fear I may need more before I can say with any certainty I have a grasp on how panels are used in storytelling. Some internet diving helped me this week, but there's plenty more to do. I foresee a trip to the bookstore or the library in my future. Minor TCOM update for the week, though it's more of a personal update. I sat down to work on a video one day, and instead wrote 11 pages about the history and world building of my story. Inspiration loves to strike when there's something I kinda don't want to do, but know I have to do. But hey, I'll take it. It's the most complete and fleshed out bit of lore building I've done in a while. And I feel like I finally wrote something that feels pretty good. And honestly, I think I have opening myself back up to consuming media to thank for that. I have been reading and watching a lot of stuff these last few weeks. And while, yes, I still have to wrestle with the little demons in my brain that want to copy-paste neat things I see into my own work, I've been trying to approach my response to this a little differently. As I sit and read a graphic novel or watch a show, I invariably run into themes, character arcs, and moments that make me go, yeah, I want to have something like that in my story too. And in acknowledging that, it's become a little easier to see how certain things can help inspire my work without me resorting to copying anything about the story I'm consuming. Because often these things are structures within a genre or story, or they're bits of world building that can be stripped down to their structural components without sacrificing the ideas behind them. And that's really helped me to think about the type of story I want to tell, which could explain why the ideas are flowing so much easier than they were before. Long story short, getting back into consuming media has really helped my creativity to flourish again, and I like it. It's a shame it took me this long to figure that out, but now I've been able to read and watch things and enjoy them in a whole new way. I'm no longer afraid of copying someone else's work, because I've been working on how to take that fascination with a plot point or character arc and turn it into my inspiration. Though that said, I'm totally going to have to grab some hairstyles from the Apothecary Diaries, because some of those will look great on the Queen. But that's not inspiration, that's I'm not good at coming up with hairstyles on my own and need a crutch. And finally, I'll wrap things up with the painting of the week. This week for my painting, I wanted to focus on figuring out the uses for the brushes I own. Specifically, I wanted to see just how well I can make precise lines using brushes. Picking the right brush for the job is pretty hard when you're used to the unlimited versatility of digital brushes, and it's something I want to continue to explore in the weeks to come. I decided to paint a tree this week, because I like painting nature, and tree branches seemed like a good way to practice making lines of various thicknesses. I started by making a blue sky background with a bit of gradation between two shades of blue, and my god, I've seen so many painters on YouTube show tips for blending colors, but it's hard to get right. They make it look so easy. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm doing what they say, and I still get choppy areas in my blend. I used a mop brush to blend the two together, and it looks okay, but I feel like this is the first time my blend actually turned out, and half that reasoning may be because the colors are already so similar. Back when I did this painting challenge before, blending colors seemed like an impossible task, so clearly what's missing for me is straight up experience. Maybe after a few more goes, I'll be able to make seamless color blends too. But man, it sure does bruise my ego as an artist when I feel like I can't manage something that seems so simple. The flowers on the tree I made using a flat-top circular brush like a stamp to blot them in. I think it turned out decently. I'd experimented with the same technique before to make clouds, so I was semi-familiar with it. I tried to get more detail in like it looked in the reference photo I used, but any attempts just made it look blotchy, so I mostly painted back over what I did. It's not bad, and I did accomplish my goal of feeling a little more comfortable with making precise lines using pointed tip brushes. I'm probably getting all these brush names wrong, I'm sorry. So, it's progress. Next week, I'll challenge myself to make something more rigid, so I have to get good at making precise lines. We'll see. That's all for this week, gang. Thanks for watching.